She crawled out of the woods, bleeding, trembling, ribs showing through golden fur. But she wasn't alone. 2 newborn puppies clung to her side, too weak to cry. No collar, no food, just desperation. Most would have turned away, but not Edith. Not the old widow who hadn't spoken to a soul in weeks. She saw the fear in the mother's eyes, and she did the unthinkable. What happened next will restore your faith in kindness, in unlikely bonds, and in the healing power of love. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe that every life matters, even the ones forgotten in the forest, hit subscribe, because this story is going to stay with you long after it ends. The early days of October had draped the town of Whispering Pines in a shawl of gold and silver mist. Nestled at the northern edge of Vermont, the town was small enough for neighbors to still wave at one another, but large enough for secrets to go unnoticed. The wind held a chill, rattling dry pine needles across dirt roads and nudging smoke from chimneys. Leaves, crisp and ochre-colored, carpeted the forest floor and rustled under the light steps of unseen animals. The scent of wood smoke, damp bark, and something older, earthy, untouched, hung in the air like a memory you couldn't quite place. At the edge of town, where the paved roads ended and pine trees stood sentinel, lived Edith Walker. At 68, Edith had the kind of posture that only decades of manual labor and quiet resilience could carve. Her back was slightly bowed, her hands thick with calluses and memory. Her gray hair was wound into a low bun under a worn wool hat, and she wore the same faded flannel coat she'd mended twice over. She was a woman of few words, not because she had nothing to say, but because most of the people she'd once said things to were no longer around. Her husband, Thomas, had passed 5 winters ago. Her son, Caleb, had left for Boston 2 years after that and rarely called. Alone in her wooden cottage that creaked during storms and sang with the wind, Edith filled her days with small routines, stacking firewood, tending a patch of wild herbs, and reading books she'd already read. That morning had begun like most others. She'd brewed black coffee on the old enamel stove, opened the creaky front door, and stepped onto the porch, mug in hand. The sky was pale, stretched with threads of pink and slate gray. Frost clung to the grass in spiderweb patterns. Edith took a slow sip, then noticed something out of place. Just beyond the porch steps, in the patch of dirt where the forest began, were prints. Not boot tracks, not deer. These were broad and deep, paw prints, and next to them, dots of dried blood. She stepped down, her breath ghosting in front of her, and knelt beside the marks. Her knees ached from age, but she ignored them. The blood was old enough to darken, but not to flake. The prints were uneven, as if the creature limped. She followed them with her eyes until they disappeared into the dense underbrush. "Coyote, maybe," she muttered. "Or a dog. Poor thing." That night, a stillness fell across the woods that even the wind dared not disturb. Edith sat by the fire, reading the same page of an old mystery novel for the 3rd time. A log popped in the hearth, and somewhere outside, something made a sound, a low, strained whimper. She paused, listening. The sound came again, not a fox, not wind through branches. It was a sound of pain and exhaustion, almost human in its sorrow. She stood slowly and opened the door. At the edge of the porch, half in shadow, stood a golden retriever. She was beautiful once, no doubt. A honey-gold coat that still glowed dimly under the porch light. But now she looked like a ghost from a better time. Her ribs showed clearly through a coat matted with dried leaves and dark streaks of blood. One paw was lifted, trembling. Her eyes, amber and enormous, locked onto Edith's, But what stilled Edith wasn't the dog's condition. It was what she carried. Nestled beneath her belly, clinging close, were two puppies, no more than a few days old. One squirmed weakly. The other was almost still. The mother lowered her head, nudging them forward gently, her body swaying with fatigue. She didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood there, panting, staring, waiting. Edith took one step forward, her voice soft and cracking. "Where did you come from, girl?" The dog's ears flicked, but she didn't back away. Her tail, though barely moving, thumped once against the porch. That was all Edith needed. "All right," she said, holding the door open. "Come on in, if you've got any strength left." The dog limped forward, stepping over the threshold with the last of her energy. The pups dragged along beneath her. Edith quickly cleared a spot beside the hearth and laid down an old quilt. The dog collapsed onto it with a sigh so deep it sounded like release. "You'll need a name," Edith said after a long pause. She knelt beside her, her eyes scanning the wound. Nothing fatal, just a gash on her side and wear from exhaustion. "Gracie, that's what I'll call you, because it's only by grace you're still standing." Gracie closed her eyes. The pups, one a lighter golden and the other a richer caramel, crawled close to their mother's belly. The smaller one didn't latch on, just lay curled. Edith's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the blanket around them. She stood and turned toward the kitchen, only to be startled by a small shape retreating from the fence outside. She couldn't see clearly, but she knew the gait. Lucas Grant, her 10-year-old neighbor, had a habit of wandering the edge of the property. He was a quiet, strange boy, tall for his age, thin like a cattail reed, with tousled sandy hair and large brown eyes often hidden behind thick glasses. He didn't talk much, not since his parents died in a car crash 2 years ago. He now lived with his Aunt Beth, a rigid woman with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue. Lucas spent his time drawing animals in a sketchbook and avoiding eye contact, but he noticed everything. Edith stepped out onto the porch, and just as she suspected, a bundle had been placed atop the fence post. A baby blanket wrapped around a box. Inside was a tin of puppy formula, an eyedropper, and a scrap of paper that read, "For the Golden Mama, from Lucas." She blinked against the porch light, heart twisting at the boy's gesture. She didn't know when he'd seen the dog or how he even guessed there were puppies, but something in him had known. She folded the note and slid it into her jacket pocket, pressing it close to her heart. Back inside, Gracie stirred as Edith knelt again. "Looks like we've got another set of hands helping us, girl." The wind picked up outside, and the pines whispered their secrets to each other. Inside the cabin, by the flickering fire, a wounded mother and her children found refuge, and beside them, an old woman who thought she'd long outlived the part of her that could nurture anything. She was wrong. The next morning dawned pale and brittle as if the sky itself were holding its breath. A light frost clung to the windows of Edith Walker's cottage, drawing silver veins across the glass. In the woods beyond, birds chirped cautiously, their songs thin and tentative. The fire had died down overnight, leaving the living room cooler but not yet cold. Edith pulled a knitted shawl over her shoulders and moved quietly through the house, her wool socks muffling each step. Gracie still lay on the old quilt near the hearth, her body curled protectively around the two puppies nestled at her belly. The stronger of the two, a slightly darker, robust little thing, was latched on and squirming with energy. But the smaller one lay still, its pale golden fur damp with cold, its breathing shallow. Edith crouched beside them, her expression tightening as she reached to gently touch the weaker pup. Its ears twitched slightly, but it made no sound. "Not on my watch," she whispered. She rose and moved toward the kitchen, her fingers brushing the edge of the table where an old wooden box sat, a relic from another life. Inside were a few of Thomas's things. She hadn't opened it in years. The box creaked as she lifted the lid and pulled out a leather-bound notebook tied with frayed twine. She untied it slowly, reverently, as if it might crumble in her hands. Inside were notes, drawings, and diagrams, her late husband's field journal from the years when townsfolk brought stray animals to him for help. Thomas had never been licensed, but his knowledge came from a long line of farm medics and a stint in the military where he'd learned battlefield triage. Edith had watched him clean wounds, set fractures, and save more than one dying creature with nothing but gauze, herbal salves, and sheer will. She flipped through the pages until she found one marked Neonatal Hypothermia, Immediate Intervention. Her eyes scanned the old handwriting. A box of towel, warm water bottles, honey water to stimulate metabolism, silence, patience, and body heat. Returning to the living room, she cleared a spot on the low table near the stove. She lined a small shoebox with the baby blanket Lucas had left the night before, soft flannel with faded stars. She folded a towel set in a warm stone she'd heated on the stove and gently lifted the weaker pup from Gracie's side. The mother whined softly but didn't move. She simply watched, eyes filled with trust and fear. "You'll get her back," Edith murmured. "I promise." The pup trembled faintly as Edith tucked her in. She boiled a teaspoon of water and added a drop of honey, stirring until it gleamed like gold. With Thomas's old dropper, she let a single drop touch the pup's lips. The response was almost imperceptible, a slight movement of the jaw, a tiny flicker. Gracie crawled forward slowly, dragging her sore leg, and lay down beside the table. Her tail thumped once against the floorboards. Edith reached out, letting her hand rest lightly on the dog's paw. "I've decided on names," she said quietly, almost shy. "The strong one Scout. This one." She looked at the small bundle tucked into the box. "Honey." Outside, a light knock on the fence caught her ear. Edith stood and stepped to the porch, and there once again was Lucas Grant. The boy stood half-hidden behind the large maple near the road, his shoulders hunched against the morning cold. He wore a green hoodie that was too big for him, the sleeves rolled up twice at the wrists. His jeans were faded and tucked into rubber boots, one of which had a piece of duct tape holding the sole together. He didn't speak, didn't wave, but he pointed at the fence post and stepped back. Edith walked down the path and found another small bundle there, a child's scarf wrapped around a tin of powdered formula and a note written on the back of a grocery receipt. "If she's still cold, heat a rock. It works for turtles. Lucas." She smiled, an unexpected, involuntary lift of her mouth, and looked toward the boy, but he had already disappeared behind the trees. She tucked the note into her coat pocket next to the one from the night before. Back inside, she continued caring for Honey in small, rhythmic movements. Every hour, she offered another drop of warm water, adjusting the towel and rotating the stone. She spoke little, but her presence filled the room. Gracie stayed close, her eyes never straying far from her pup. By mid-afternoon, the puppy let out a faint squeak, a sound so small it could have been missed. Edith startled. "That's it, sweetheart. That's the sound I've been waiting for." She gently moved Honey back beside Gracie, who immediately nuzzled the pup, with her nose licking gently. Honey weakly rooted forward, searching, finding. Edith exhaled and leaned back against the wall, her hands shaking slightly. Relief ran through her like warm light. Later that evening, as golden light poured through the front windows and painted the floorboards in rich amber, Edith brewed tea and wrapped herself in a thicker shawl. The house smelled of pine old paper and the faint sweetness of honey water. Gracie lay stretched beside the fire, Scout dozing beside her, and Honey now curled up close, her chest rising and falling with more certainty. Edith didn't speak much that night. She didn't need to. As darkness fell, she moved her chair closer to the fire and laid Thomas's notebook on the table, her hand resting on its cover. She glanced toward the window, half expecting to see a shadow move by the fence. But no one came. Still, she whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Lucas. In the heart of the forest's whisper and flickering firelight, 3 lives had been spared, and one soul, long thought dimmed, began to glow again. The wind had shifted. Not the kind that rustled branches or snapped laundry off backyard lines, but the subtler kind, the wind of voices behind closed doors, of sideways glances at the grocery store, of polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Edith Walker felt it before she heard it, like a ripple across the surface of a still pond. It started 3 days after Gracie's arrival. The puppies were now feeding well, their bellies round and soft, their eyes barely beginning to open. Gracie had regained some strength, even managing to hobble into the yard that morning under Edith's watchful gaze. There was a grace to her movements, even with the limp, and a quiet dignity that made Edith proud in a way she hadn't felt since Caleb was small. But as Gracie stretched in the fading sunlight, a car rolled slowly past the edge of Edith's dirt road driveway. The vehicle didn't stop. It didn't need to. The shape of it, a dusty silver SUV with the town council decal half peeled off the back window, was familiar. Inside sat Barbara Kincaid, a woman in her late 50s with tightly curled gray-blonde hair and a nose perpetually wrinkled like she'd smelled something offensive. She was one of the self-appointed moral guardians of Whispering Pines, a retired librarian who now spent her time moderating community forums and organizing volunteer watch patrols no one had actually asked for. Barbara didn't wave. She just squinted through her tinted window, then drove off. By the following morning, whispers had grown legs. Edith overheard them in the bakery, 2 teenagers mumbling about the lady with the wolf dog. At the post office, a man who'd once helped Thomas change a tire barely made eye contact. And on the town's community Facebook page, a new anonymous post had popped up. Is it safe to have someone harboring wild dogs on the edge of town? I thought we had rules. The woods are for hiking, not hiding animals. No name, no picture, just an all-too-familiar tone. Edith tried to ignore it, but when she walked into Rowley's market for eggs, even Angela Rowley, the stocky, no-nonsense shop owner with sharp lipstick and an allergy to gossip, arched a brow. "Edith," she said quietly, "I don't care what you do in your house. But some folks are talking. You might want to be careful, especially if that ranger gets involved." That ranger came 2 days later. Rick Dawson was younger than Edith expected. Mid-30s, tall and broad in the shoulders, with a clean-shaven face and sun-darkened skin. He wore the green uniform of Vermont Fish and Wildlife, his boots muddy, his voice calm but distant. "Afternoon, Ms. Walker. Got a few calls this week. Some concerned residents said they saw a large dog or possibly a coyote on your property. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Edith stood straight, her expression unreadable. "She's a golden retriever. Her name is Gracie. She's not a threat to anyone." Rick's tone didn't change. "Does she have a collar?" "Papers. She came to me injured, with 2 puppies. There was no collar." He took notes, eyes scanning the yard where Gracie sat near the porch. Her ears pricked forward, tail curled around the pups dozing beside her. "You understand the town has ordinances about unregistered animals, especially ones with unknown behavior. I understand what I saw. A mother trying to survive. I've seen worse threats come out of city council meetings." That drew a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, but he said nothing more. Instead, he handed her a flyer, regulations about wildlife custody contact info for shelters. "Just doing my job, ma'am." When he left, Edith stood on the porch for a long while watching the dust settle behind his truck. What she didn't know was that Lucas Grant had been watching too. From his perch at the edge of the woods hidden behind a patch of sumac, Lucas had seen the ranger arrive. He'd seen Edith's posture stiffen and the way Gracie instinctively placed herself between the pups and the stranger. He'd also seen the way the ranger looked like he already had an answer and was only gathering facts to justify it. Lucas didn't have a phone, but he had his aunt's old camera, a point-and-shoot Kodak with a cracked screen and a temperamental zoom. He pulled it from his hoodie pocket and clicked quickly. One photo, Gracie curled protectively around her puppies. Another, the ranger's truck, the flyer in Edith's hand. Then a close-up of Gracie licking Honey's nose, her eyes soft and unthreatening. That night, Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor of his bedroom, lit only by a small desk lamp. His sketch pad lay open beside the camera. On one page, he sketched Gracie's face, framing it with pine branches. On the other, he glued one of the printed photos with the caption, "She's not wild. She's a mother." At school the next day, things didn't go any easier for him. Lucas was used to being an outlier. While other boys ran for footballs and told jokes about teachers, he walked the perimeter of the schoolyard, his head down, always drawing. But today someone had found his sketch of Gracie tucked inside his locker. Derek Simmons, tall and loud with a chipped front tooth and a love for showing off, held it up. "Yo, is this your girlfriend or something?" Derek sneered. "You dating dogs now?" The group of boys howled with laughter. One grabbed Lucas's notebook and tossed it across the blacktop. Another mimicked a bark. Lucas stood silent, his fists clenched, his ears burning. He didn't fight. He never fought. Instead, he walked to where the notebook landed and picked it up carefully, checking to make sure the picture of Gracie hadn't torn. Later, when he got home, he added a new page to his growing folder. This one he titled in shaky handwriting, "Proof They Don't See What I See." It was nearly dusk when the gray sedan pulled into the gravel driveway, scattering pine needles and lifting dust into the quiet air. The forest that bordered the cottage stood motionless, its tall trunks painted gold by the sinking sun. The house looked almost like something out of a storybook. Soft light spilled from the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, and on the porch, a golden retriever lay calmly, two puppies tucked beneath her flank. Inside, the smell of chamomile tea mixed with the faint scent of pine resin and old books. Caleb Walker, 35, hadn't seen his childhood home in over 2 years. He stepped out of the car, stiffly wearing a navy suit jacket that hung awkwardly over a wrinkled t-shirt and sneakers too clean for a Vermont driveway. His brown hair was cropped short, more out of convenience than style, and his face, lean, clean-shaven, and tired, carried lines that hadn't been there the last time he visited. His eyes scanned the yard, narrowing at the sight of the dog. Of course, he muttered. Only Mom would turn her front porch into an animal shelter. Edith opened the screen door just as Caleb stepped toward the house. She hadn't aged in the dramatic way he expected, still upright, still wearing her stubborn flannel and worn jeans, but her face seemed thinner, like the years had pressed in from the inside. "You came?" she said, her voice somewhere between surprise and relief. "You called me 3 times in 1 week, Mom," Caleb replied, forcing a smile. "That either means someone died or you've adopted a bear." Edith tilted her head toward the porch. "Not quite. Come say hello." Caleb stepped up cautiously. Gracie lifted her head, sniffed the air, and then let out a low, barely audible chuff. Her tail wagged once, slow and non-threatening. Caleb stopped short, eyeing the puppies. "You're seriously raising dogs now?" he asked. "They came to me," Edith said simply. Gracie was injured. She had nowhere else to go. Caleb exhaled, clearly holding something in. "This is why people are talking. I saw the post, Mom. About wild animals. You're not young anymore. What if that dog had attacked you?" "She didn't," Edith replied, her tone firm. "She protected her babies, just like I would have." Caleb looked away, then down at the pups. One of them, the smaller one with a creamy golden coat. Honey squirmed toward him and let out a soft squeak. He knelt, surprising even himself, and touched her with 2 fingers. Warm, fragile. Inside the house, Edith poured tea and motioned for him to sit. As she handed him the mug, Caleb noticed a small audio recorder on the table, an old model with a cracked plastic casing. "You still keep this thing around?" he asked. "Press play," she said quietly. He did. The voice that came through was grainy but unmistakable. Thomas Walker's voice, gentle and low. "Sometimes a dog doesn't just live beside us. Sometimes she lives for us, reminds us what loyalty looks like when we forget." Caleb froze. He hadn't heard his father's voice in years. Edith reached over and paused the tape. "I found it last week. Thought you might want to hear it." For a while they just sat there in silence. Outside, the forest darkened, and Scout let out a tiny bark in her sleep. Later, there was a knock at the front gate. Caleb opened the door before Edith could. There stood Lucas Grant, bundled in a hand-me-down coat too big for him and gripping a flat brown package wrapped in brown paper. His face, thin and pale, was flushed pink from the cold. His glasses slipped slightly down his nose. "You must be Lucas," Caleb said. "She's mentioned you." Lucas didn't answer. He held the package out to Edith, who took it gently. Inside was a drawing, charcoal, and watercolor. It showed Gracie lying in the warm glow of the front window, the puppies curled at her side. In the background, the shapes of trees and stars shimmered faintly. The detail was extraordinary. Gracie's eyes captured with exact tenderness, her fur glowing like a halo. Lucas shrugged. "I just wanted to give it to her, before someone takes her away." Edith's eyes moistened, but she blinked the tears back. "No one's taking her, sweetheart. Not if I can help it." Caleb looked at the drawing, then at the boy. "Did you draw this?" Lucas nodded once. "It's incredible." Lucas shrugged again, then turned to leave. "Bye, Ms. Walker." "Wait," Edith said. "Would you like to come in for a minute? They're all asleep now, but you can sit with them for a bit." Lucas paused, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. Inside, Gracie watched the boy enter her gaze calm. She rested her head back on her paws and let him kneel beside her, his fingers gently brushing Scout's fur. Edith stood behind them, Caleb at her side. "Funny," Caleb said under his breath. "Dad used to say the forest had its own way of finding who needed healing." Edith smiled faintly. "I think the forest sent her. And maybe it sent Lucas, too." The storm rolled in without warning, dark clouds swallowing the last light over the hills of Woodpine, Vermont. Winds whistled through pine needles like the echo of a warning no one could decipher in time. Edith Walker had always known how quickly weather could turn here, but even she paused by the window, clutching her cardigan close as the first crack of thunder split the sky. Rain lashed against the glass in slanted bursts, and beyond it the forest seemed to shudder. Lucas hadn't come by that afternoon. She stood in the doorway a moment longer, brow furrowed. Gracie, lying near the hearth with her puppies curled at her belly, suddenly lifted her head. Her ears perked. Then, without a sound, she stood, trotted to the back door, and scratched twice. Gracie Edith called, but the dog didn't look back. She let out a low whimper and scratched again more urgently this time. Edith opened the door just a crack. Rain flew sideways, soaking her sleeve. "You're not going out in this," she started, but Gracie pushed forward, slipping into the night before she could stop her. Thunder rolled again, and Edith's heart sank. Earlier that day, Lucas Grant, the quiet boy with too many thoughts and too few words, had taken his sketchpad and graphite pencils to a wooden shack near the edge of the forest. The place had once been a hunting blind, now half collapsed and lopsided, but it gave him solitude and, more importantly, a view of the deer paths through the trees. He had started drawing a new piece, Gracie, in motion. Her back arched as she leapt over a log, water splashing beneath her. The rain began softly, and Lucas ignored it at first. But within minutes it became a downpour. Wind whipped around the shack, and the creaking roof groaned ominously. He gathered his things, stuffed them into a plastic grocery bag, and tried to leave, but the trail had turned to mud and the stream nearby had swollen into a brown rushing channel. The bridge, a plank someone had nailed over the water, was already submerged. He turned back. His jacket was soaked shoes squelching the shack barely shielding him. Thunder rattled through his ribs. He huddled against the back wall, arms around his knees, and waited. Gracie didn't hesitate. She tore through the wet underbrush, head low, ears flat against the wind. Rain slicked her golden fur dark and heavy, but her steps never faltered. She followed the scent faint under the storm, but there Lucas and fear and something cold. She found the shack just as a tree branch crashed down behind it, sending water and debris flying. Lucas was curled up inside, shivering uncontrollably, his lips a faint blue. When he saw her, his eyes widened, but no words came. Gracie nudged him, barked sharply once, then pawed at the edge of his coat. Lucas clutched at her fur instinctively. He wasn't strong enough to stand, but Gracie lowered herself, letting him cling to her back. Then rose carefully. He weighed almost as much as she did, but she pushed forward, muscles straining. Rain blinded them both. The path was now a stream water up to her chest in places, but she kept going, each step a defiance. When they reached the edge of the woods, headlights broke through the rain. Edith, in a raincoat 3 sizes too big, was sprinting toward them with a flashlight in hand, boots splashing. "Oh my God, Lucas." The boy slid from Gracie's back into Edith's arms. He was conscious barely and muttered something about stars dancing in the trees. Edith pulled him close. Tears and rain indistinguishable on her cheeks. She looked at Gracie, who stood soaked and trembling but still upright. "You found him," Edith whispered. "You saved him." By morning the storm had passed, leaving branches scattered like bones across the roads and water pooled in every hollow. At the Woodpine Gazette office, a woman named Teresa Hall, mid-40s, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, tapped her pen against her keyboard. She'd once covered city politics in Hartford, but after moving here for a quieter life, she found herself reporting on bake sales and lost cats. That morning, however, she received a photo in her inbox from a retired mailman named Gus. The picture showed a golden retriever, drenched, emerging from a flooded path, a boy clinging to her back. The composition was rough, but the emotion hit hard. The headline almost wrote itself, "Dog Rescues Boy in Storm. A town's heart warms." Within hours, the story spread across Woodpine. By lunch, it was being shared on local Facebook groups with captions like, "God bless this dog," and "We don't deserve them." At school, Lucas walked into class still pale but no longer invisible. Kids who used to laugh at his drawings now leaned in to ask questions. One girl, Mia, a freckled chatterbox with too many bracelets, offered him a juice box and said, "That dog's like your guardian angel." Lucas didn't reply. He just opened his sketchbook and added a halo over Gracie's head in one of the pages. That evening, Edith sat beside the fireplace, Scout and Honey tumbling in her lap. Caleb read the Gazette article aloud, his tone skeptical but amused. "I can't believe this is real," he said. Edith smiled. "Believe it, Caleb. That dog saved a life. And maybe not just one." Gracie lay nearby, paws crossed, head tilted slightly toward the fire. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Caleb added, "You know what Dad would have said?" Edith nodded. "That miracles wear fur sometimes." The community hall of Woodpine hadn't seen this many people since the winter carnival 6 years ago. Folding chairs clattered on hardwood as neighbors filed in, some curious, some skeptical, others already clutching folded petitions. The air buzzed not with festivity, but with judgment. At the front stood a long table with 3 members of the town council, each seated stiffly behind nameplates. The center chair was occupied by Linda Garvey, the council chairwoman, a woman in her early 60s with a sharp bob of gray-streaked black hair and a reputation for being fair but unyielding. She wore a navy blazer and the kind of glasses that made her eyes look twice their size. To her left was Derek Fenn, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard always in hand. To her right, Marge Kinsey, a retired librarian who wore floral scarves regardless of season and had a soft spot for dogs, though she rarely spoke first. Edith Walker sat in the second row with her hands clasped tight on her lap. She wore a simple olive-green cardigan and a long corduroy skirt, her silver-streaked hair pinned neatly. Caleb sat beside her, one leg jittering, jaw tense. In his other hand, he held a small USB drive, the one with his father's old audio files. Whispers buzzed behind them. She's keeping wild animals in her home. But didn't that dog save a kid? It's still a liability. Gracie wasn't allowed inside the hall, but she waited patiently outside, sitting beneath the bench by the front steps, flanked by Scout and Honey, both wearing handmade scarves with their names embroidered in crooked stitches, gifts from Lucas. The meeting was called to order at 6:05 p.m. sharp. The matter on tonight's agenda, Linda began, her voice echoing off the high ceilings concerns Mrs. Edith Walker and her continued harboring of a stray canine and its offspring on private property. Allegations include potential public safety risk, improper animal housing, and unauthorized emotional support designation. Edith rose, slowly walked to the front with quiet dignity and faced the crowd. Her voice, though low, carried. "I didn't invite Gracie into my life," she said. "She chose it, and I'm better for it." Murmurs again. Someone coughed. Before the council could respond, a small voice cut through the room. "Excuse me." Heads turned. Lucas Grant, still small for his age, but standing with more presence than ever before, walked slowly up the aisle. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped a photograph, Gracie in the rain, Lucas on her back, the moment that changed everything. "I was lost," he said. "The storm was bad. I could have drowned. But she found me. She didn't even know me, and she still came." Linda adjusted her glasses. "Lucas, dear, thank you. But the issue at hand? She saved me." Lucas interrupted gently. "Isn't that what we want in this town? People or animals that save others?" He handed the photo to Linda, then turned, walked back, and sat beside Edith. She squeezed his hand. Caleb stood next. "My father was a quiet man," he began. Didn't say much, but he recorded thoughts, advice, memories. Before he died, he said something I didn't understand then. "Sometimes a dog doesn't just live with you, it lives for you." He played the audio clip on his phone. His father's voice, low and gravelly, filled the hall. "Don't dismiss what can't speak back. Dogs see things in people we forget to look for in ourselves." Silence followed. Then slowly, someone else rose. He was a stocky man in his 70s, in a faded army jacket pinned with old medals. His name was Walter Reams, a Vietnam veteran known for showing up to every Memorial Day event but little else. "I don't speak at these things," he said, voice gruff. "But I was pulled out of a ditch by a dog in 1969. Lost my whole platoon, but lived because a mutt sniffed me out and wouldn't leave. We make room in our hearts for animals that save us. This town should too." Applause broke out soft at first, then louder. Marge Kinsey dabbed at her eyes and leaned into her mic. "Perhaps it's time we stop treating this like a liability and start seeing it as a gift." Linda tapped her pen, considered the room, then nodded. "Very well. The council moves to approve the continued care and housing of Gracie and her pups by Mrs. Walker, under the designation of emotional support animal with proper documentation to follow." Caleb exhaled audibly. Lucas grinned. Edith closed her eyes, silently mouthing a prayer. Outside, Gracie lifted her head as the doors opened. Scout barked twice high and excited. Honey yawned, then nudged her mother. Edith crouched beside them, her eyes brimming. "You're staying, girl. You're home." Later that week, the town's small newspaper published a photo of Gracie sitting beside the community hall steps with a blue vest reading "Emotional Support. Woodpine VT." The caption read, "From stray to symbol how one golden retriever united a town." A mural began forming days later on the side of the old bakery, painted by local students. Gracie, her eyes turned toward the horizon, flanked by 2 puppies and a line beneath trust earned in silence. The first snow came quietly to Woodpine, descending like whispers from the clouds, blanketing rooftops and softening the edges of the world. Edith Walker stood by her kitchen window, cradling a chipped blue mug of chamomile tea, watching the white settle on the pine trees that bordered the edge of her yard. Her breath fogged the glass slightly. In the distance, Scout and Honey darted through the snow like golden comets, yipping and tumbling their energy a bright flame against the cold. Gracie sat not far from them now, leaner but stronger. Her pale golden coat thickened for winter, the faint scar along her flank nearly hidden beneath new fur. Her gaze followed her pups with steady, calm tail brushing back and forth like a paintbrush on frost. She had changed in these weeks, less guarded, more playful. Her eyes glowing not only with the alertness of survival, but with something gentler now belonging. Inside, Caleb worked near the hearth. He wore a flannel shirt that had once belonged to his father, dark green and too big in the shoulders. With sleeves rolled to the elbows, he hammered the final nail into the handmade wooden shelf above the fireplace. His hands were calloused from weeks of sanding, sawing, and repainting every crooked corner in the old house. The ceiling no longer dripped in the rain. The stairs no longer groaned like ghosts. And the living room walls had been adorned with new frames, including one that held Lucas's drawing Gracie and her pups beneath a beam of soft light with, "To the bravest Mama," scribbled in the corner. Caleb paused to survey the room, dusting his hands on his jeans. He'd made a decision weeks ago, one that he hadn't voiced at first, but now lived out with each nail he drove and every board he fixed. He was staying. The town once divided by rumor and fear had changed too. It began with Gracie's vest and title. Then came the invitations, schools asking for visits, nursing homes requesting a meet and greet. It didn't take long for the townsfolk to realize what Gracie brought wasn't just comfort, it was trust restored. Lucas arrived mid-morning, cheeks red from the cold scarf trailing behind him like a comet's tail. He carried a small, flat parcel beneath his arm and a plastic container wrapped in foil. "Morning, Miss Edith," he chirped, boots kicking snow from the porch. He was taller now, or perhaps just stood straighter. Confidence had begun to take root in his posture, blooming quietly like winter crocus. Edith opened the door with a smile. "Come in, sweetheart. Your nose looks like Rudolph's." Lucas grinned and stepped inside, pulled off his hat, revealing his mop of chestnut curls. "I brought peanut butter cookies. Dad used to say they're best warm." The house smelled of pine cinnamon and crackling firewood. Gracie padded over to greet him, tail wagging. Lucas knelt to rub behind her ears. "Hey, girl," he whispered. "You still the hero around here?" Scout barked. Honey licked Lucas's mitten. Caleb emerged from the hallway, wiping his hands on a towel. "You bring more drawings?" Lucas's face lit up. "Actually, yeah, this one's for the festival." He handed over the flat parcel. Caleb opened it carefully. Inside was a watercolor Gracie, Scout, and Honey nestled in snow beneath twinkling lights with Lucas's signature in the corner and a title above 3 Friends in Winter. "That's beautiful," Edith breathed. "It's going in the town's winter art show," Lucas said, trying to sound casual. "Ms. Riley said they're displaying it on the library's front wall for the whole month." Edith wrapped him in a one-armed hug. "Your parents would be so proud." Lucas looked down, then up with a small, almost shy smile. As the fire crackled, Caleb leaned against the mantel. "You know I've been working on reopening the old shop downtown," he said. "Used to be Dad's place back when he fixed everything from radios to rocking chairs. Figured maybe it's time to do more than just fix things, maybe feed a few hearts too." Lucas tilted his head. "Like a store?" "Not just that," Caleb replied. "Walker and Whiskers. A fix-it-and-feed-it spot. Repairs in the back, pet treats and supplies in the front. maybe even a shelf for someone's art. Lucas blinked. Seriously? Seriously? Gracie barked once as if sealing the deal. Outside, the snow deepened. The woods surrounding the house no longer looked like barriers but gentle walls around a newfound home. Caleb replaced the tea kettle, Edith ladled out soup, and Lucas sat on the floor with the pups. Winter had arrived in Woodpine, but so had something warmer, something that couldn't be measured in degrees. Later that night, as they hung small ornaments on a tree Caleb had cut from the edge of the property, Edith paused beside a dusty old box labeled Christmas, Caleb YR8. She lifted the lid, revealing faded crafts and a tiny clay paw print. Her fingers trembled, but her heart did not. She added one of Lucas's new ornaments beside it, a painted bone with Gracie's name. From the corner of the room, Gracie watched them, golden eyes flickering in firelight, head resting between her paws. Honey slept curled beside Scout, a circle of warmth against the cold. No one spoke of loneliness that night. They didn't have to. It had been replaced. It was the kind of morning that whispered of endings before anyone had spoken a word. The sun rose slowly over Woodpine, brushing the treetops with warm gold and coaxing the snow melt into silver rivulets along the edge of Edith's porch. Birds returned to the pine branches, their soft songs punctuating the silence like prayers. Gracie did not rise with them. Edith found her just after dawn, lying peacefully under the covered porch where she'd loved to rest. Her body was still, but not stiff. Her face held no fear. One paw stretched slightly toward the yard as if still watching over her two grown pups. The wind tugged gently at the fur along her shoulder. Scout sat beside her, head bowed. Honey nestled close, eyes half-lidded and unmoving. Caleb came outside with a mug of coffee but stopped mid-step. His shoulders sagged, eyes locked on the scene before him. He didn't speak. He just placed a hand on Edith's back, firm and steady, and together they stood in silence. The news spread through Woodpine in quiet ripples. Gracie had become more than a dog. She had become a story, a symbol. And so when Edith pinned a simple note to the church bulletin board, anyone who loved Gracie is welcome to say goodbye under the pine, the whole town came. That afternoon, under the old pine tree where Gracie had once laid whimpering, barely alive, the town gathered. The bark of the tree bore claw marks faded but still there, a reminder of that desperate arrival. Now a circle had been cleared in the thawing ground. Beside it, a stone slab had been carved by Caleb, simple and smooth. Sarah Kincaid stood at the edge of the crowd. A retired schoolteacher, tall and reed-thin, with white hair in a tight braid and glasses that perpetually slipped down her nose, she had once written the anonymous post about the widow and her wild dogs. Time and regret had softened her. Today she wore her best navy coat and clutched a small bouquet of rosemary and forget-me-nots. When her turn came, she laid the flowers down and whispered, "Forgive an old woman's foolish fear." Mayor Hal Simmons, a short, round man with a deep voice and a shock of silver hair, read a short poem someone had left in the town suggestion box. It wasn't signed. It spoke of redemption, guardianship, and second chances. Lucas, now older, taller, and more composed, approached last. He held a framed painting in his hands. The crowd parted for him like water. He knelt beside the stone and placed the frame at its base. The painting showed Gracie standing at the forest's edge, bathed in golden light, her head turned toward the rising sun. The brush strokes were soft, luminous, alive. At her paws, tiny flowers bloomed from snow. Above her in the sky, a single phrase curved with the light. She didn't belong to anyone, but she saved everyone. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Edith bent down and pressed her hand to the soil beside Gracie. "You came broken," she said, voice barely audible, "and you made us whole." Later, the porch was full of townspeople sipping cider and sharing stories, funny ones about Honey stealing mittens or Scout howling at snowmen. Some cried, some laughed. Most did both. Inside, Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, Scout resting his head on the boy's knee. Honey lay curled at Edith's feet. Caleb stood in the kitchen doorway, polishing a wooden sign he planned to hang at the shop in memory of Gracie, patron saint of second chances. Night fell. The fire cracked gently. Scout lifted his head, once ears twitching. Honey stirred but didn't move. Lucas glanced out the window and saw the old pine tree bathed in moonlight. "Do you think she knows?" he asked quietly. Edith looked up from her knitting. "I think she always did." Spring eventually came in full. The porch was rebuilt with a small bench under the eaves. Children visited often. People left dog biscuits wrapped in napkins by the gate. A candle burned each evening on the windowsill. And Gracie remained not in bark or bone, but in story. In sketchbooks filled with paw prints and sunrays. In a boy who had once been lost and now knew where he belonged. In a widow who had feared the future and now embraced it tail and all. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles wrapped in thunder or fire, but in golden fur and gentle eyes. Gracie came into their lives not to be owned, but to remind them what love without condition looks like. She was never just a dog. She was a healer, a bridge, a light in a dark season. Through her, a broken family mended, a lonely boy found his voice, and an entire town remembered how to care. Maybe your miracle won't bark or wag its tail. Maybe it's a second chance, a stranger's kindness, or the quiet strength to face one more day. But believe this, miracles still walk among us. If Gracie's story touched your heart, please share this video. Subscribe to Kindred Creatures for more stories of hope and leave a comment below with Amen if you believe that love like this is a blessing from God. May the Lord watch over you and your loved ones today.